The Parker family lived in a peaceful suburban neighborhood, in a beautiful house that seemed like it belonged in a magazine. Their home was large, well-kept, and full of warmth, with a big yard and cozy rooms. To anyone who saw them, the Parkers looked like the perfect family. David Parker, a successful lawyer in his early 30s, was the picture of success. He was always dressed in sharp suits and was well respected at work, where he was climbing the career ladder. People admired him for his ambition and charm. He had a beautiful wife, 2 kids, and a successful career. Everything seemed perfect. Rachel Parker, his wife, was in her late 20s and stayed at home to raise their 2 children. She was the ideal mom, warm, kind, and involved in the community. Everyone admired her for how well she balanced family life and social activities. Rachel's friends often said she had the perfect life. David and Rachel had been married for 6 years. They had met in college, fallen in love, and started a family soon after. But despite their outwardly perfect life, there were problems lurking beneath the surface. David's busy job kept him away on business trips for long periods of time, leaving Rachel to handle the home and kids alone. Over time, the distance between them began to create tension in their relationship. While David was focused on work, Rachel felt lonely and disconnected. To help with childcare, they hired a young babysitter named Emily Turner. Emily, in her early 20s, was friendly, eager to please, and quickly became a trusted part of the Parker family. She was always responsible and did a great job looking after the kids. Rachel was impressed with how well Emily fit into their family and trusted her completely. However, what Rachel didn't know was that David and Emily had been secretly having an affair for several months. Their relationship had started innocently, with David simply enjoying the attention of a young, attractive woman, but it quickly became something much more. They met in secret when Rachel wasn't around, and their affair became more intense. David, though guilty, couldn't resist the temptation. He kept up the act of the perfect husband, hiding his secret from Rachel and their friends. While Rachel thought of Emily as a responsible and dependable babysitter, Emily began pushing David to make a choice: either leave his wife for her or face the consequences of their affair being exposed. But David, terrified of losing everything he had built, kept avoiding any serious decisions. Emily and David's secret affair has become a web of passion and secrecy. Their meetings, though filled with intense desire, are conducted in hidden corners of the city or in the shadows of David's home when his wife, Rachel, is away. David's business trips have been a convenient excuse, allowing them to share stolen moments without the fear of being discovered. Emily, once swept up in the excitement of their forbidden relationship, starts to feel the weight of their secrecy pressing on her. Although the physical connection remains fiery and charged, she grows frustrated with the emotional walls David has erected. She's yearning for more than just these secret rendezvous and whispered promises. Emily wants David to be open about their relationship, to tell the world about what they share, but David's refusal to make their love public only increases her anxiety. Her desire for transparency grows as she begins to wonder whether David is still truly invested in her, or if she's simply another chapter in his otherwise predictable life. While Rachel remains blissfully unaware of the affair, she begins to notice subtle shifts in her husband's behavior. It's not the overt signs of guilt that raise her suspicions. David is too careful for that. But small changes in his demeanor begin to stand out. He's more irritable and distant, snapping at her for little things and becoming defensive over seemingly innocent comments. The warmth in their relationship, once so comfortable and predictable, is slowly replaced with a tension that Rachel can't explain. David's frequent business trips and late nights at work become more and more common, And though Rachel doesn't suspect infidelity, the air around her husband feels colder. Her once solid trust in him begins to crack, but she doesn't yet know what's causing the shift. She just knows that something is off, and it's making her feel uneasy in her own home. The creeping doubt in her mind starts to form, though she is unwilling to voice her suspicions, fearing that she might be imagining things. This quiet, growing anxiety creates a storm brewing beneath the surface of their seemingly normal life. The strain of secrecy has finally taken its toll on Emily. She's tired of the hidden life, tired of being David's dirty little secret. One evening, after yet another stolen moment together, Emily snaps. Her frustration boils over, and she confronts David in a way she never has before. In a raw and emotional outburst, she demands that he make a choice, her or his wife. "I can't keep doing this, David," she says, her voice trembling with anger and hurt. "If you really love me, you'll leave her. You'll leave your perfect little life and start over with me, or I'll tell Rachel everything. I'll expose you. I'll ruin your family, your career, and your reputation, if that's what it takes." Emily, consumed by her desire for a real relationship with David, is willing to take drastic measures to force him into making a commitment. The ultimatum is a desperate, dangerous move, but in her eyes, it's the only way to stop feeling like a hidden shadow in his life. David's reaction is immediate and visceral. The thought of Rachel finding out about the affair fills him with terror, not just for his marriage, but for everything he's worked for: the stability of his family, his career, and his carefully curated image. He can already hear the fallout in his mind, the inevitable divorce, the damage to his professional standing, the whispers in the community. David had never imagined it would come to this. He had always assumed he could control the situation, keep the affair hidden long enough until he could somehow extract himself from Emily without consequences. Now, his carefully constructed life is unraveling before him. He tries to calm Emily down, assuring her that everything will be taken care of, that he'll handle it. "Just give me time," he pleads, his voice trembling slightly as he puts on a facade of control. But inside, panic begins to claw at him. He knows he can't let Emily's threats get any louder, any more public. The idea of her revealing the affair is a nightmare he can't afford to face. David's mind races as Emily's words hang in the air, the tension palpable. A part of him feels anger towards her for putting him in this position, but another part of him feels deep regret for ever getting involved in the first place. He never intended for things to go this far, never thought Emily would become so desperate. But now, there's no easy way out. If he walks away from Emily, she will destroy everything. If he chooses her, he'll lose everything he has built with Rachel. The stakes have escalated from a quiet affair to a high-stakes game of betrayal and blackmail. David is torn, caught between his love for his wife and the fear of losing everything he holds dear. The internal conflict eats at him, and a dark, chilling thought begins to form in his mind. Emily has become a liability. Her threats could ruin his life, and if she won't back down, there's only one way to silence her for good. David realizes, with sickening clarity, that he may have to eliminate the one person who knows his secret to protect everything he's worked for. The decision weighs heavily on him, but the thought of losing his family and career outweighs everything else. The breaking point has arrived. The sleepless night that David endures becomes a turning point in his life. His mind races with thoughts of Emily's blackmail, and the overwhelming pressure to preserve his family and career consumes him. He is no longer thinking about the affair, or even Emily herself. All that matters now is eliminating the threat she poses. As dawn breaks, David makes a final, chilling decision. Emily must be silenced permanently. His love for Rachel, His devotion to his children and the life he has built are all on the line. He tells himself, it's the only way to keep everything intact, the only way to protect his future. But deep down, a part of him recognizes that his descent has begun. He has crossed a line he can never uncross. David begins to plan her murder with the same meticulous precision that he's applied to every aspect of his life. He knows the house well, the layout, the security systems, the routines, and begins to devise a plan that will make her death look like a random break in gone horribly wrong. He knows the risks, but the thought of Emily's threats continues to haunt him. His cold resolve hardens into something darker. David's plan hinges on timing and manipulation. Rachel, unaware of the storm brewing, has a school event to attend with their children that day. This gives David the window he needs. Emily will be alone in the house, with no one around to hear or witness anything. He knows this is the perfect moment, the ideal opportunity to execute his plan. David uses the knowledge he's gathered over months of living with Rachel to craft a believable scenario, a break-in gone wrong. He knows the house's blind spots, where the security cameras are weakest, and where Emily's vulnerability lies. He anticipates the chaos that would ensue after such a violent event, and he plans on using that confusion to cover his tracks. As Rachel and the children leave, David watches them go from the window, his heart pounding in his chest. He feels a cold detachment take over, as though he's already distanced himself from the man he used to be. Calm before the storm settles in, and David prepares to carry out the unthinkable. The next step in David's twisted plan involves ensuring there are no traces of his involvement. He buys a weapon, carefully selected, with no ties back to him. The weapon is chosen with precision, something that can do the job quickly and without leaving too much of a trace. He makes sure it's something that won't be easily traced to him, taking every precaution to cover his tracks. David rehearses his alibi repeatedly, going over the details in his mind as if the execution were a business deal. His heart races as he considers all potential risks, how he'll act, how he'll appear to others, and how he'll maintain his composure once the deed is done. He knows he can't afford to slip up, not when everything is on the line. His mind is sharp, calculating each step of the plan with ruthless efficiency. With everything in place, David feels a final moment of clarity. There's no turning back now. Emily will be silenced, and his life will go on. The darkness has consumed him, and in that moment, he feels both empowered and trapped. Empowered by the control he's taken over the situation, and trapped by the reality of what he's about to do. He is no longer the man he once was. He is someone entirely different now, someone capable of unspeakable actions in the name of self-preservation. David returns home early, his nerves buzzing with tension. He had planned for the day to unfold a certain way. But now, as he steps inside his home, a strange sense of dread fills the air. Emily is sitting in the living room, alone, as he expected. Her posture is stiff, her eyes darting to the door as if she's been waiting for this moment. When she sees him, her face tightens, sensing the heaviness in the atmosphere. Their eyes lock, and for a brief second, time seems to stand still. There's no warmth in his greeting. His mind is consumed by the one thought ending this once and for all. Emily stands up, her voice trembling with anger and frustration. "I thought you'd finally come to your senses, David," she says, her words sharp, demanding the promise of a future together. But David can't give it to her. He's already made up his mind, and in that moment, he knows he must follow through. He tries to reason with her, his voice calm, but tinged with the fear of what's to come. "I can't leave her, Emily. I told you that. You have to understand." But Emily, no longer willing to be silenced, refuses to back down. The conversation quickly spirals out of control. Her voice rises in anger, her words accusing, her demand for a future together becoming desperate. "You promised me," she shouts, her face flushed with frustration. "You said you would leave her for me." David's resolve falters, his patience wearing thin. The emotional pressure is too much to bear. The heated argument escalates rapidly, both of them shouting over one another, their voices growing louder, more frantic. In this moment of chaos, David's mind shifts from trying to talk her down to a darker place, where logic is drowned by his escalating panic. The argument becomes too much for David. He sees no way out, no way to appease Emily's demands without everything falling apart. In a fit of blind rage, his hands move without thinking. He grabs Emily by the throat. Her eyes widen in shock, but the act feels almost detached to him, as though he's become a spectator in his own body. His grip tightens, and Emily struggles beneath his hands, her breath coming in short gasps as she tries to break free. The frantic fight for air, the desperate flailing, only drives him further into a frenzy. He squeezes harder, his anger overriding any lingering sense of humanity. As the life drains from her, the chaos of the room seems to fade, leaving only the sound of her strangled gasps and the silence that follows. The moment she goes limp in his grasp, a cold clarity washes over him. She is gone. David stands over her body, his heart pounding as the weight of what he's done starts to sink in. The realization doesn't bring guilt, only a sense of finality. This is it. This is the end of it all. Emily will no longer be a threat to him. David wastes no time in making sure there's no trace of him left in the scene. His training in planning and control kicks in as he methodically wipes down every surface he's touched, every door handle, every piece of furniture, anything that could potentially link him to the crime. He moves swiftly, his mind calculating, removing all evidence that could expose his involvement. He wants it to look like a random, botched robbery. David carefully disturbs the surroundings, scattering objects around the room to create a sense of disorder. A lamp is knocked over, a drawer left open, its contents spilling out onto the floor. He wants to make it seem as though Emily had been caught by surprise, as if she had been the unfortunate victim of a stranger's violent act. He then steps back, taking in the scene one final time to ensure it looks chaotic enough to confuse any potential investigation. No detail is overlooked. When he's certain that there's nothing left to implicate him, David quickly leaves the house, locking the door behind him. He heads out, his steps purposeful, his thoughts steely with cold precision. There's no turning back now. The crime has been committed, and he's done everything in his power to make sure he's not tied to it. His heart beats fast, but with it, he feels the suffocating weight of what's been set in motion. He leaves the house as if nothing happened, his mind already preparing for the alibi he'll construct. The perfect crime, he thinks. A crime with no connection to him. Rachel returns home from the school event, her mind still preoccupied with the day's activities. She feels a sense of relief, knowing she's finally home with the kids. But as she steps inside the house, something feels off. The front door is slightly ajar, and the usual calm of her home is replaced by an unsettling silence. Her heart races, and as she moves further into the house, the sight of the disarray in the living room stops her in her tracks. Furniture is out of place, a lamp is on the floor, and drawers are open, their contents scattered across the room. She calls out for Emily, but there's no response. Panic rises in her chest, her mind jumping to conclusions. When her eyes land on the lifeless body of Emily lying on the floor, the shock takes over, and she stumbles backward. She feels the world spin around her as the horrifying reality settles in. Emily is dead. Her stomach lurches, and her first instinct is to call the police. Trembling, she dials 911, her voice trembling as she explains that someone has broken into the house and attacked Emily. The dispatcher reassures her that help is on the way, but Rachel can't shake the feeling that something isn't right. She watches in stunned disbelief as the police arrive shortly after, taking control of the scene. Rachel can barely comprehend the magnitude of what's happened. Her entire world is turned upside down, and the mystery of what occurred in her own home begins to unfold with chilling clarity. David arrives shortly after Rachel's frantic call, having been informed of the tragic discovery. He enters the house with a facade of concern, his face twisted in shock and horror, as if the news has just broken his heart. He's the picture of a distraught husband, and Rachel, in her state of panic, doesn't question his demeanor. He hugs her, whispering words of comfort as the officers begin their investigation. David's thoughts, however, are far from the tragedy unfolding in front of him. Inside, his mind is calm, even calculating. He plays the role of the concerned husband flawlessly, offering the police whatever information they need while acting as if he's just as shaken as everyone else. He dials Emily's parents, feigning grief as he tells them the devastating news. His tone is steady, his voice measured, and his appearance unwavering. He has successfully compartmentalized the horror of what he has done, convinced that everything is proceeding exactly as he had planned. He knows that the police will treat this as a simple burglary gone wrong, and the thought of Emily's death never crosses his mind again. In his mind, he's already moved past it. Nothing is going to ruin his life now. Despite David's careful performance, there are subtle signs that begin to raise the investigators' suspicions. The house, though in disarray, doesn't quite match the typical chaos of a robbery. The burglars would have likely taken valuables, yet nothing seems to be missing. Nothing of value is out of place. The police start to wonder why the scene feels too staged. There are no signs of forced entry, and the security system is intact. The officers begin to notice the way Emily's body has been positioned, deliberate, almost too carefully arranged, as though someone tried to create a convincing story. The marks around her neck, though indicative of strangulation, appear controlled, not like the frantic violence one might expect in a struggle with a burglar. As the investigation deepens, small inconsistencies begin to surface in David's alibi. He claims he was away on a business trip, yet a quick check of his whereabouts on the night of the murder raises questions. There are discrepancies in the timeline, gaps in his story that don't quite match the events Rachel remembers. His calmness, too, is noticed by the detectives. He seems too composed, almost as if he's not reacting the way a grieving husband should. The more the police dig, the more they realize that the crime scene doesn't match David's story. Suspicion begins to creep into the investigation, and they begin to take a closer look at him, following the trail of evidence that might unravel the truth. David remains outwardly unshaken, but in the back of his mind, the pressure is mounting. He knows that his perfect plan is now under scrutiny, and he has to stay one step ahead of the investigators if he wants to avoid the consequences of his actions. As the investigation deepens, the police begin to piece together more details of David's life, and their focus narrows onto his connection with Emily. Detectives painstakingly comb through his phone records, emails, and social media accounts, and soon enough, the illicit affair comes to light. A trove of text messages and photos between David and Emily paints a vivid picture of their secret relationship. The messages, often flirtatious and intimate, span several months, indicating the affair was not a brief encounter but an ongoing betrayal. What shocks the investigators even more is the financial trail that emerges. David had been paying for Emily's lifestyle in subtle but telling ways. There are records of hotel stays, expensive dinners, and even purchases made under Emily's name at high-end stores, expenses that David had somehow managed to cover without raising suspicion. Further investigation reveals that David had been using his personal credit cards and a separate business account to fund their secret rendezvous. This new evidence paints a picture of a man who had been living a double life for much longer than anyone, including Rachel, had suspected. The affair wasn't just about physical attraction. It was a carefully orchestrated deception, with David using his wealth and power to maintain his extramarital relationship under the radar. The discovery sends a shockwave through the investigation, providing the police with a compelling motive for the murder. With this new information, they begin to connect the dots. David's desperate need to silence Emily, to end the affair before it was exposed, becomes the final piece of the puzzle. The detectives, now armed with undeniable proof of the affair, begin to put pressure on David. They confront him with the evidence, but David's composed demeanor starts to crack under the mounting scrutiny. His alibi begins to fall apart, and the inconsistencies in his story become more glaring. The detectives shift their focus entirely to him, and their suspicions turn into certainty. Rachel, devastated by the truth, is forced to confront the depth of her husband's betrayal. She had suspected something was wrong, but the reality of his affair is far worse than anything she had imagined. Her world is shattered not just by Emily's death, but by the realization that her husband had been leading a double life. Rachel finds herself torn, caught between the love she once had for David and the overwhelming sense of betrayal that consumes her. She is pushed to the edge of an emotional precipice, unsure whether to continue supporting the man she married or to accept the brutal truth of his actions. Her internal conflict mirrors the external pressure David is facing as the investigation closes in on him. Rachel's grief and confusion leave her vulnerable, but the police are resolute in their pursuit of justice for Emily. The turning point comes when the police finally have enough evidence to arrest David. He is charged with first-degree murder, the brutal killing of Emily, a consequence of his greed and desperation to preserve his family and career. The arrest shocks the community, as the man once seen as a successful businessman and devoted husband is revealed to be a murderer living a secret life. The media frenzy surrounding the case is intense, with tabloids and news outlets devouring every new detail. As details of the affair and David's role in Emily's death are exposed, public opinion quickly turns against him. His once stellar reputation is shattered beyond repair, as the truth of his betrayal and the murder of his lover comes to light. For Rachel, the arrest is the beginning of a painful new chapter. While she may have suspected her husband's infidelity, nothing could have prepared her for the depth of his deceit and the horror of his actions. She is left to grapple with the aftermath of not only losing her husband to the justice system, but also losing the image of him she had cherished for so long. The case becomes a widely discussed topic, with people in the community grappling with the complexity of a man who appeared to have it all but was ultimately driven by his own selfish desires to commit murder. David's arrest marks the tragic end to a life built on lies and manipulation, and the beginning of a long journey of healing and reckoning for those affected by the crime. David's trial becomes a media sensation, with everyone eager to learn about the shocking crime. The courtroom is filled with reporters, curious members of the public, and people who want to know more about the man who seemed to have it all until his secrets were revealed. The prosecution presents solid evidence showing David's guilt, his affair with Emily, his motive for the murder, and the steps he took to cover up the crime. Rachel, David's wife, gives an emotional testimony. She talks about the pain of discovering his betrayal and how she felt when she learned that David had killed Emily. She describes how, for years, she trusted David and how everything changed once she found out the truth. Her testimony is heart-wrenching, and it makes the courtroom realize just how much damage David's actions caused. The defense tries to argue that someone else might have killed Emily, but the evidence against David is overwhelming. Forensics link him to the crime scene, and financial records show that he had been paying for Emily's lifestyle. The truth about his affair and the murder is laid out in full, leaving no doubt about his guilt. After the trial, the jury takes some time to deliberate, but it's clear they believe David is guilty. When they announce their verdict guilty of first-degree murder, the courtroom is filled with tension. David remains calm, but the reality of his conviction hits hard. He is sentenced to life in prison without the chance of parole. The judge makes it clear that David's actions were a severe betrayal to both Emily and his family. The media continues to cover the case, shocked by how a man could destroy everything for a secret affair. David's conviction doesn't just end the legal battle, it shows the public just how far he went to protect his secrets, no matter the cost. While Emily's family may find some sense of justice, the emotional toll on Rachel and their children is far from over. After the trial, Rachel is left in emotional turmoil. Learning about David's betrayal and the murder of Emily has shaken her to the core. The trial doesn't bring the closure she hoped for, only reveals more of the pain. Rachel must now rebuild her life, though it feels impossible at times. She decides to move with her children to a new home, away from the place where their family was supposed to be. It's hard for Rachel, but she knows she needs to start fresh. Still, the memories of her life with David and the pain of what happened continue to haunt her. Rachel works hard to create a new life for her children, but the emotional damage to them is deep. Losing their father to prison and seeing their mother struggle with the heartbreak is a lot for them to process. Over time, Rachel begins to heal, focusing on her children and herself, but the scars left by David's betrayal will never fully go away. For David, the trial marks the end of his life as he knew it. He destroyed his own family in pursuit of selfish desires, and now he faces a lifetime in prison. As for Rachel, the end of the trial is only the beginning of her journey to rebuild her life and move forward from the pain David caused.